Okay. I would like to share some thoughts and ideas about the impact of all this COVID crisis on businesses globally. In FastTrack, we're in the interesting and privileged position that we talk to companies all over the world all the time. And we are fascinated by the different reactions of different companies. And I see some activities that work very well. We see some activities that don't work at all. So basically, we're going to share some experiences. What happened to us is pretty fascinating. I mean, our world almost changed completely for the last 5-6 months, and it was all very sudden. If you guys remember, back December, January, life was normal. All of a sudden, we had this storm from a clear sky, and now most companies, because life is disrupted in a big way, most of us ask now, what's going to happen? Now what? And we see that this is a great opportunity for some companies and for some managers. And at the same time, we realize that it's a great opportunity, but only for a very few companies. So we've been trying to explore the idea, who will be the winners and who will be the losers. And first, I would like to zoom out and see the big picture, because a lot of people, a lot of analysts globally, financial analysts, political analysts, social people who understand the social fabric, they think our lives will not be the same again. Let me dive deeper into this. My first point is the world has seen much worse. I mean, we don't have to go too much back in history. If you just go 78 years ago, this is how our world looked like after the Second World War. 80 million people died. If you go back to the war in Vietnam, 1.5 million people died. If you go to the war in Syria, which is still going on, 500,000 people died in one country. Afghanistan, 750 million people died. And let me give you another more scary number. Last year, 5 million kids died because of starvation. Just try to understand this number. 5 million children globally died because of starvation. If you take 2 years back, 10 million kids died. And if you talk about COVID, since the beginning of the crisis, globally, 700,000 people have died. So in global perspective, this crisis is actually pretty small. So we are making something huge out of it. And if you ask me, for no reasons. And if you think about it, 10 million kids died. And I'm yet to see a government that is closing airports, that is stopping countries, that is closing factories to help us to save these 10 million children. So we have seen much worse. And where is the world today? Our medical system in any country is as advanced as it has ever been. Infrastructure is intact, so the virus doesn't touch the infrastructure. Our communication capabilities are better than at any point of history. Every country on the planet has more cash than it has ever had. Education, I mean, we shouldn't forget that we are the most educated generation that ever lived on this planet. So when we try to understand what shall we do with our business, a critical element of planning is predictability. We should ask ourselves a simple question. What is predictable in this situation and what is not? And what we find out, the fundamentals of business are actually predictable. So let me take you through some critical questions. Number one, the number of people on the planet will remain the same. I mean, even if you take the worst case scenario, explosion of the virus, actually statistically, the number of people and therefore the number of customers on the planet will remain the same. Number two, there will be a treatment. Yes, we can argue it is going to be 5 months, 6 months, 10 months, 12 months, it doesn't matter, but there will be a treatment. And guess what is going to happen? This will become history. Human nature will not change. We believe it takes much more than what's happening now to change human nature. And again, if I go back to the Second World War, just imagine complete devastation. Your house is ruined, your town is ruined, there's no food, there's no electricity, maybe even your family is killed. 2-3 years later, we behave in the same way. So 2-3 years later, human nature goes back to normal. Infrastructure is out there waiting. Factories are there, the airports are there, the roads are intact. So they're ready to do what they're supposed to do. Now, this is a critical one, supply and demand. If you want to understand the game we play in, we should understand supply and demand. And if you're scared from the virus, you're scared from your life. If you're scared from the crisis, you're scared for your spending. And demand is generated by spending. What kills demand is the feeling of uncertainty. And the problem, for me, the huge problem with this crisis is the tremendous feeling of uncertainty that governments are causing all over the world, because we don't know what's going to happen. And eliminating this uncertainty will trigger the engine of growth again. So understanding supply and demand in your industry is absolutely the main question that we need to figure out. Cash is critical, but cash will behave as always, and cash is driven by the risk of the law of risk and return. Now, that's an interesting one. The global order is changing. And we have done a lot of analysis, and we are trying to understand how IT industry develops, how the finance industry develops, how retail industry develops, manufacturing, supply chain. And we see some very, very clear signs that the next 4 or 5 years will be the dominance of China, not the dominance of the US. And further down, I'm going to show you some numbers that hopefully will support this assumption. Industries will behave differently, like they have always done. Some industries, like companies, they are born, they grow, and they die. Some companies get born, they grow, and they die. So going through a bankruptcy is part of capitalism. Bankruptcies are absolute inevitable part of the game we play. So we see 3 different patterns. Some industries now are dormant, but they'll go back to their normal state. I think hospitality will go back to normal. Global travel will go back to normal. Business travel, leisure travel may be slower than business travel, but it will go back to normal. Some industries are dormant and they will die. We believe retail, in the way we know retail, will die, but it's not because of the crisis. It's because the crisis just accelerates some technological development. I mean, the retail industry was doomed to change anyway, with or without a crisis. This just accelerated the change. We see IT on steroids. A lot of companies that are in the IT and tech sector are moving faster than before the crisis. And one thing that is certain and predictable, after this crisis, like after any other one, there will be winners and losers. So the interesting question is, are you going to be one of the winners, or are you going to be one of the losers? So our main assumption is that the business fundamentals will not change. And one thing will matter. It does matter today, and it will matter in the future. How fast you move. Are you moving faster than the other players in your industry, or are you moving slower than the other players in your industry? How do you measure this? Are you launching more products or services on the market than your competitors? And at the end of the day, we're absolutely convinced that fast will beat big. So it's disruption time, but it's not because of the virus. It's disruption because of the technology. And the key question we need to answer, is your company future ready? We see 3 new driving forces. Number 1 is information and data. Number 2 is the technology that actually helps us to use this information. And number 3 is geopolitics. Let me try to give you some idea why we think China is the main driving force for the next 4 or 5 years. Innovation in a country is measured by the share of gross domestic product spent on R&D. Let me share some numbers with you. This is the share of spending on R&D in Europe as part of GDP for the last 5-6 years. This is the United States, and this is China. And then if this spending in R&D is successful, companies create patents and they file for patents. Now, let me have a quick glance what is happening with annual patent filings for the last 10 years. This is European Union, this is US, and this is China. Now, if some of these areas for patents are more critical for the development of the world than others. And I hope you would agree, communication, telecommunication is one of the most critical elements. And this is 4G. 4G was the mantra of telecommunication 5 years ago. Let me show you how 4G patents were split around the globe. US, 36%, Europe, 10%, Korea, 37%, and China, 1%. But the next generation of communication is 5G. Now, let me show you what is happening in the area of 5G. US, 17%, European Union, 6%, Korea, 12%, others, 33%, China, 32%. So I hope we can all see the writing on the wall. Why is this important? Because it might have a fundamental impact on your business, on manufacturing, on sourcing of products, on travel, on key customers. So I think this is the area of exponential growth, and exponential growth is driven by this curve. Exponential growth means price or quality change twice, double every year, and this is how it looks like. Now, you see this curve. If you analyze almost any industry, and if you study the winners in any industry, you see this curve across the board. On this graph, you see Walmart with the blue line, the biggest retailer on the planet, and you see Amazon. And I hope you recognize the curve. If you go to another industry, the car industry, you see General Motors, one of the big traditional players in the industry, at the bottom of the graph, and you see Tesla. So you recognize the curve. So whenever a company talks about growth and you analyze your plans, you should be extremely careful. The measure of growth has changed. And if your growth pattern doesn't move along this exponential line, you shouldn't be considering yourself a growth company. 20 years back, if you grow 5, 6, 7, 10%, that was okay. Today, if you're growing less than 50, 60, 70%, you're not using technology, you're falling behind the curve. What we can scale, we can only scale 3 things. The first thing we can scale is technology. The second thing we can scale is the mindset of people in organizations. And the third thing we said we can scale the strategy and the structure of the company. The issue is, if you want to follow along this line, you need to be tackling each one of these 3 things together, and you cannot eliminate any one of them. What is the bottom of it? Data. Data. We have not been able to come across a industry or a company where data cannot dramatically improve the performance of the company. So if we can outline one single capability in an organization that is critical to maintain speed for the next 5 years, it is the ability to collect data, the ability to make sense out of it, and the ability to implement what data is telling us extremely quickly. And data does 2 critical things. First, it helps us to understand the consumer better. It helps us to predict consumer behavior. And the second one is it helps us to optimize processes in a company that human beings cannot do. And when you optimize the processes, you become more efficient. When you become more efficient, your cost structure becomes lower. When you optimize processes, you become faster. So this is the magic that data actually today can do for any companies. And if you zoom out, and if you want to understand where speed is generated in a company, actually it's a pretty simple picture. A company is only a composition of 4 critical blocks. Number 1 is the market. And a lot of companies start setting targets, they start doing strategy, they start changing the organization without crystal clarity on the market. So the first step of any movement is, do I understand the market? What is the market? My consumer. And we're not interested in the market today. When you're doing a strategy, you should do the strategy for 2-3 years later. So your ability to understand the consumer today, to understand driving forces, to anticipate how the market will look like in 2-3 years' time is absolutely the step number 1. Once you have this, you set up your goals. A lot of companies set incremental goals. We want to grow 10%, we want to grow 15%. We believe this is wrong. We believe the only way to set up a target is through market share. When you understand how many people visit Mumbai, when you understand who is your customer, so which one of these people is your customer, then you decide how many of these people you would like to come to your hotel and how much money they have to spend. So we believe the key way to set up a target is through market share. So once you're clear about the market, once you're clear about your target, the next question is, how shall I achieve this? And this is a strategy. And strategy starts with the consumer. Strategy is a promise you make to the customers. Good strategies don't talk about your company. Good strategies talk about your consumer. Good strategies talk about the needs of your consumer. Mediocre companies understand the needs of consumers and respond. The great companies understand how these needs will evolve in the future, and they try to be there first. So once you clear these three boxes and once you do the intellectual thinking, then you have the most difficult question. How do I design the machine that will enable me to deliver my strategy and to achieve the goals? And then what we do is start throwing products or services to the market, and the market is giving us feedback. So that's it. This is the whole picture. If you're running a business, these are the elements you should run. So if your business is successful, it's happening somewhere here. If business is not successful, it's happening somewhere here. So we as managers focus only on two things. We take decisions and we develop processes. So just to summarize very quickly, the 5 principles that we believe are the backbone of speed and efficiency of a business today. The first one is the 80-20 principle. 20% of business of any hotel, any restaurant, any enterprise give 80% of the result. If you haven't done the analysis, if you don't have crystal clarity, which are the 20%, you cannot be efficient. So the first step of running any business, especially in a crisis, is to identify the 20% where you should focus. The next one is simplicity. You cannot create a fast company if you're not simple. And unfortunately, we have done a lot of work in India. And our biggest struggle, actually, we've had 2 huge issues. One is to simplify structure, to simplify processes, to simplify the way people think. And we think this is one of the main reasons of inefficiencies of Indian companies, this dramatic lack of simplicity. What is simplicity? Is pretty simple. It's your ability to turn this device into this one. Yes, it's part of the culture. Yes, it is part of the way people think. Yes, it's part of the way people have been thinking for the last 2,000 years. But guys, the world has changed. And one of the things that has changed, you're not only competing in India, you're competing on a global stage. So you're competing with the Germans, you're competing with the Dutch, you're competing with the Americans, you're competing with the Singaporean guys. So if you want to compete on this stage, there are some rules that apply across the borders. So the second rule is simplicity. The third one is focus. And I can promise you, if you spend some time with your management team and only clear these 3 things, identify the 20%, simplify your operation, and focus like a laser on the 20%, the speed of your company will double, irrespective of if there is a crisis or no crisis. The last element is, the fourth element of speed is brutal honesty. What is brutal honesty? Are you able to openly say and share your thoughts within your company? And unfortunately, we have seen the opposite in a number of senior management teams in India. We have seen a lot of people who have fantastic ideas or who see big mistakes in the thinking or decisions of management, but they're not willing to share their thoughts because it's not politically correct or it's not socially acceptable. What is the end result? It is the biggest drain of human intellect and capital. Because if you don't share your thoughts, if you don't share your ideas, your management is going to make more mistakes than if you do share it. So changing this way of communication is the 4th critical element of speed. And the last one is beginner's mind. When you are very experienced, especially running a successful company, you start believing that everything that you have done is a recipe for success. And that's true if the world doesn't change. But there is a saying that exactly when you think you know all the answers, life changes the questions. And today, when technology is changing the world so rapidly, by definition, some of your success formulas from the past is not going to work for the future. So it is absolutely critical to have the intellectual stamina to challenge, irrespective how old you are, irrespective how experienced you are, irrespective where you are in the social pyramid. You should be able to stop and challenge your own thinking and your own beliefs almost on a daily basis. So to summarize for us, the 5 critical elements of energy and speed: 80-20, simplicity, focus, brutal honesty, and beginner's mind. I see I have 2 more minutes, and maybe we should stop here and see if you guys have any questions.
Thank you so much, Christo. It was a pleasure having you here for the first time. With the way questions have been coming in, it's clear everyone really enjoyed your session. So thank you so much for being here with us today. But we're over time, so I'm sorry, we'll have to not take any questions this time.
Okay.
But again, thank you so much. Really a pleasure having you here.
Have a good evening.
You too. Have a nice day.